Hi, I'm Pastor Michael Schmidt. Welcome back to Summer Bible Study. Today we are covering the events of Genesis 6 through 9, which we know as the flood. This is the flood narrative, Noah and the ark. There is a bit of lead up to this, kind of chapter 4 after the Cain kills Abel, murders Abel. There is a kind of the lineage of Cain, and throughout that lineage you can see the increasing amount of sin. So we kind of start off with 1, just Cain murders Abel. That is a serious sin. But then chapter 4 really kind of carries out Cain's line and shows that the level of sin, the violent nature, just keeps increasing and increasing throughout the generations. If you remember, Tubal-Cain is kind of a famous one here. He particularly is listed as a particularly evil man. Just trying to catch it real quick here. I think Tubal-Cain. Oh, there it is. Verses 22. Verse 22, Tubal-Cain was a forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. We can take that as, he may have made pots and tools, but he also made weapons of war. So that's just kind of the lineage of Cain shows that. Chapter 5 is the lineage of Adam to Noah, and this follows the line of Seth. Seth is the faithful son that kind of replaces Abel, and his line is then the faithful line that continues on. And so chapter 5 then draws out his lineage from the lineage of Seth, from Adam to Seth, all the way down to Noah. So then chapter 6 begins with the account of Noah. Noah is interesting in that chapter 6, verse 9, Noah is described as a righteous man. And we can kind of take that to be Noah's a good guy. This is going to be a different phraseology used here in chapter 6 than the way Abraham is described, particularly the later you get into Abraham's life. The Abraham of chapter 12 is a different Abraham than the Abraham of chapter 22. Chapter 12, Abraham would never take his son and slaughter him on the mountain at God's command. Chapter 22, Abraham has that faith in God to do it. So kind of later Abraham has a stronger, different faith than Noah does here in chapter 6. Kind of the way we normally think about it is that Noah's a good guy based on what's around him. He's good, holy, and righteous. We remember him in the church as a faithful man, but he's faithful compared to his generation. He's not exactly faithful when you put him against Abraham or Elijah or David or someone along those lines. Noah's a good guy. He's faithful. He is obviously kind of like our generation. Our generation today would not stack up against previous generations when it comes to biblical knowledge. We have faithful people today, people who know the scriptures extremely well, and they stand out among us today. But in a different generation, they may not have stood out quite so much because the general population had a greater understanding of Scripture. So when we talk about Noah, Noah is good, but it's more Noah's good compared to those around him, as opposed to Noah is exceptionally good in the way of Abraham. But this is important because the earth, there's a downfall of creation. Is that creation starts out very good in Genesis 1 and 2. Then there's the fall and the sin, the first murder, and then all of a sudden we are going downhill, top speed, no brakes, can't stop. That is the descent of creation into sin, into separating itself from God. So the world that Noah lives in is much different than the world of, obviously, Genesis 3, but also just Genesis 4. There is a fast decline in civilization in terms of faithfulness, heeding God's word, and living as his children. We could almost describe the world Noah lives in as something comparable to today, where there are righteous people in the world today, but there's also a very large segment that is wicked, that hates God, hates his word, hates his church. So Noah is living in a world that, probably has a lot of similarities to our own. That God's patience, as we see throughout Scripture, with unbelievers, he almost has more patience with unbelievers than he does with his own people. There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, his own people should know better. Whereas unbelievers are going to be in a different level of thought or level of understanding. But where God does not have patience with unbelievers is when they break his natural law. In terms of murder, in terms of marriage, in terms of life, in terms of how we act. God will suffer a lot with unbelievers, but he will not suffer everything. There's a reason God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. There's a reason Jonah goes to Nineveh. There are other wicked places, but those places have gone above and beyond, and they are breaking the natural law that God has put in the hearts of every human being. That you don't need me to tell you murder's wrong. You know murder's wrong. Unbelievers know murder's wrong. So when you are actively practicing murder, particularly of the innocent, the unborn, and the elderly, that is something that goes above and beyond, and that God is going to take notice of and have a judgment on. Whereas, shooting someone in the street, yes, God does not favor that, but he looks at it differently than he does murder in the womb or murder of the elderly. So what Noah is living in is a world that is rejecting the very basic law that God has put into the hearts of his creation. But because Noah is a righteous man, God will save Noah and his family. So Noah, Mrs. Noah, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives. So that's 8 in all, plus the animals on the ark. Talks about length here. Verse 19, of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kind, animals according to their kind, creeping things of the ground according to their kind. 2 of every sort shall come in to you to keep them alive. Take with you every sort of food that is eaten and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. So what's being described here, this is kind of our apocalyptic scenario here, is if life is uninhabitable on earth, what are we taking with us? What are we preserving? What are you putting in your nuclear bunker? Some of these things are worth considering, is that's kind of what God is preparing Noah for. We're going to preserve 2 of every kind of animal, and we're going to preserve every kind of food. and we're going to put it on the ark so that we can maintain creation. What do we need to survive in the event of an apocalyptic event? A global flood that wipes out everything. That means if we don't take these animals into the ark, they will cease to exist. If we don't take this food into the ark, it will cease to exist. We will cease to exist because we do not have this food. So this is an apocalyptic event that is described here, this global flood, that wipes out and destroys everything. Chapter 7, there is a little bit of a nuance there. God is telling Noah to get onto the ark. Verse 2, take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, male and his mate, pair of the animals, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens, also male and female, to keep their offspring on the face of all the earth. So here there is a distinction made of 7 pairs of every clean animal and only 1 pair of every unclean animal. So God does distinguish this. He's preserving everything, but there is a kind of a distinction there that, we really want to make sure the clean animals populate and fill the earth, and we really want to keep the unclean animals around. Part of the ecosystem of the earth includes keeping the clean and the unclean around. Unclean animals do serve a purpose. That purpose, at least in the Old Testament, is not for food for the people of God, but they do serve a purpose. They are set apart. They were created by God. They were declared to be very good, and now they are separate and distinct and preserved by God in the ark. So there is that distinction there. 7 pairs of the clean, 1 pair of every unclean. So that we can continue the creation, continue life. So this does mean that all animals that were alive at the time of Noah went into the ark. Now when they get off the ark, now you can look around and say, well, we don't have some animals today. That's correct. So everybody got on the ark. Nobody was made extinct because of the flood. Everyone was preserved on the ark. Kind of the distinction is the difference of life when they get off the ark for humans and for animals. In creation, everyone's a vegetarian. Everyone is vegetarian at the end of Genesis chapter 2. Kind of when they get off the ark, there is a change in the biology and the chemical makeup of the animals. And they too are part of the fall, and they are affected by the fall into sin. And this may have even been happening before the flood, is that, animals just took on a predatory nature. Some animals became predators, other animals became prey. Some animals just got eaten. There's also, a climate change after the flood. The world is different. The atmosphere, the creation, the land, it's all different. And so when animals get off the ark, they're they're dumped out in one place. And they're told to go fill the land. But there's also the land is a lot different than it used to be. And so, you didn't experience winter. Well, now you're going to experience winter. You didn't experience drought. Now you're going to experience drought. So the animals, all the animals go into the ark. All the animals come out of the ark. But there is a difference, a distinction that when they are out of the ark, they're in a different atmosphere, a different climate, a different habitation than they were when they went into the ark. So they are different. And this deeply affects them. So everybody goes in, but and everybody comes out. But once they get out, not everybody survives to today. There are far fewer animals on Earth today than there were at the flood. Because some of them are lost. They're extinct. All right. Verse 11, Noah is 600 years old when he boards the ark. Again, another change that happens after the flood is human lifespans are much different. Noah will live 750, I believe. And then he dies. Shem, Noah's son Shem, who outlives Abraham of all things. Shem outlives Abraham, according to what we have in the Bible. And Abraham's kind of in the new generation, the new world, where Abraham only lives into his early hundreds, whereas Shem will live several hundred years. But then Shem is kind of the demarcation point where Shem is kind of the last of that generation. Nobody really lives that long, as long after the flood. Lifespans after the flood are much more in line with what we live today. So that is a difference there. So they board the ark. Then chapter 7 kind of describes the flood. The rains come down. It covers the earth. Everything is washed out. You kind of see artist renderings or people climbing on top of the mountains, and the waters are still climbing. All of that happens during the flood. They are, people obviously probably try to save themselves. To some extent, it may very well have been a quick death for a lot of people. Is when you look at the water coming up, and we're talking potentially geysers shooting out water, and almost like a tsunami coming in, and just coming in and crashing over, and very quickly everything is wiped out. That could very well be what happens. And so people didn't really linger around. They may not even have the opportunity to go, maybe only a few had an opportunity to bang on the door of the ark and beg Noah to open it. But certainly not a majority. Because it's very likely that this was a very quick and sudden thing. The heavens just opened, and water, to get that much water that quickly and to do that much damage, it's got to come really, really, really fast. There have been occasions where it rains a couple days in a row, maybe every day for a week, and it's wet. There's lots of puddles. It's soggy out, but we're not at any flood stage. Or even when there is a flood stage, these floods that do happen in our own area, and I'm particularly thinking of the Mississippi River. It floods its banks, and quite frequently, is when it floods really fast. It's not just creeping inch by inch. It's kind of a quick rush of water that comes. And that's kind of what probably happened here in Genesis, is the water just came really, really, really fast and wiped everybody out very quickly. And the ark was quickly lifted off the ground. Chapter 8, verse 1 has a remarkable turn of events. Chapter 7 concludes with the flood waters rising and their destructive nature. Chapter 8 begins with this great verse: God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And this is helpful for us today, is that we are tempted to think that God forgets about us, that he doesn't remember us, that he's forsaken us. And yet chapter 8, verse 1, God remembered Noah. is that God, in chapter 7, God invests all his time, all his energy into unleashing the waters of destruction upon the earth. But chapter 8, verse 1, God remembered Noah. That in the midst of everything else he was doing, God did not forget Noah. He remembered him, and he remembered everyone that was in the ark. And he remembered his promise to him. Another key for us today is that God remembers his promises. We forget things. We forget things all the time. People tell us, most famously, someone could tell me their name. I will remember their name for 2 minutes, and then I will completely forget their name. Sometimes I have to hear names 2 or 3 or 4 times before I finally get it in. But we are very forgetful. We forget God's promises. But God does not forget his promises. God does not forget his people. God remembers Noah. And he remembers the ark. And he remembers his promise that they will they'll be on the ark, but when the flood is over, everybody gets off the ark. All right, so the flood does, it rains 40 days and 40 nights. That is important, but, the rain then, the water piles up, and then it kind of sits for a while. They are on the ark for probably a year. If you factor in that they get on the ark, then it's a week, then it starts raining. Rains 40 days and 40 nights. And then you got to wait for the waters to recede. The waters to recede, to go back down. Then you have to wait for the land to just dry out. And then you have to wait for vegetation to kind of make a comeback. And all of this takes a while. So they may have been on the ark for up to a year. Just waiting for all this to happen. Famously, Noah does send out a dove a couple times just as a scout to see what's going on. There's no record of God telling Noah to do this. So it may have just been they were getting anxious and Noah decided, well, let's just send out a dove and see what happens. Maybe it's safe. So he does do that a couple times, just sends it out, and then the dove comes back. The first time it comes back with nothing, then it comes back with an olive branch, and then the third time it does not come back at all. So it goes out there and it found a place to live. At the end of the time, so in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, this is chapter 8, verse 13, Noah removes the covering. The second month, God says, go out from the ark. So Noah is 600 when he boards the ark. He's 601 when he gets off the ark. So about a year, they're on the ark for about a year. And the first thing Noah does when he gets off the ark is he builds an altar to God. He gives thanks to God that he has been preserved through this. And then, of course, God puts the rainbow in the sky. The rainbow really does serve two purposes. Number one, it is for us, that we can look up and we can see the rainbow. And it is a reminder of God's promise, of God's presence, of God's protection. We look up and we see that rainbow, and we remember, yes, God has promised that he will not send a global flood. But also we look up and that God promises to be with his people, to remember his promises. So that is number one. The bow is for our benefit, that we can look up and see that rainbow and remember its promise. But then number two is that God looks down and sees the rainbow. It's almost like a force field around us. That you can make the argument creation is worse today than it was in Genesis 6. that we are far worse today than we were in Genesis 6. That we have thought of ways of sinning no one in creation has ever imagined before. That we have taken sin to the next level. That is how much worse we are today than in Genesis 6. And even in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, or there are several times during the wilderness wanderings where Israel is making its way to the promised land, where God looks down and he wants to destroy his own people. And then if you're going to destroy all your own people, well, you might as well destroy the rest of the creation and just start over again. So the rainbow is also a deflector. God sees that rainbow and he can't get through it. That the rainbow is protecting the creation from God's wrath. That God sees that rainbow and it is a reminder to him that he will not destroy the creation again. It's a reminder to us, and it's a reminder to God that he will not destroy his creation again. But that rainbow serves two purposes. It's a reminder for us, and it's a reminder for God. So that rainbow still stands there today. It is an eternal promise. One other thing to make note of is just the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The godly line, this is the line that shows up in the genealogy of Jesus. It's also the one that shows up that's going to be the genealogy for Abraham and the faithful people of Israel going forward, is the line of Shem. On the other hand, Noah's son Ham, he's going to become what we call the father of the Canaanites. They are, of course, the wicked people who are constantly a thorn in the flesh to the children of Israel throughout their lives. So the creation is starting over in every sense of the word. The human population is starting over here with the sons of Noah. That Adam and Eve started it. They gave us Seth. They gave us that God faithful line. They also gave us Cain and his ungodly line. Well, now we're going to start everything over again. This time with 8 people. It's not really clear if Noah and his wife have any more children. I would probably say no. But, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are, we traditionally take them to be very young when they get on the ark. And obviously when they get off the ark. And so they and their wives could have lots of children. So the creation is starting over again. And when we talk about everyone traces their roots back to Adam and Eve, that's true. It's also true that everyone traces their roots back to Noah and his family tree. Because it's Noah that we all descend from today. Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth. Chapter 9 does end. Noah lived 950 years. So he does live a long time. Shem will live a long time. But then again, that's kind of the end of the extraordinary lifespans that we find in Scripture. After that, Moses lives to about 120. And that's kind of where people max out. There's a couple that live to 120. Not many, but a couple. All right, so that does bring us to the end of chapter 9. We will begin next week with the life of Abraham. So do look forward to that. Feel free to send your questions or comments or any thoughts or ideas, what we missed, anything important that we missed that you think we should have covered. Again, this Bible study is designed to introduce you to the Bible stories and to lay that foundation, to hopefully encourage you to go back and to study these stories and accounts on your own. So again, study the Word. The story of Abraham begins in chapter 12 of Genesis and goes through chapter 24. We'll kind of hit the highlights next week. But until then, have a great day.